The House of Commons descended into absolute chaos today as Prime Minister Keir Starmer faced the most explosive parliamentary security scandal in years. The collapsed China spy case has become a political minefield threatening to detonate the government's credibility, with accusations flying from all sides about who bears responsibility for this catastrophic failure of national security. The case centers around two men who were meant to face trial for allegedly spying for Beijing, but the prosecution dramatically collapsed last month in circumstances that have left MPs demanding answers. Christopher Cash, a former parliamentary researcher with access to sensitive information, and Christopher Berry, a teacher, were charged under the Official Secrets Act in April 2024. They were accused of gathering and providing information prejudicial to the safety and interests of the state between December 2021 and February 2023. The Prime Minister opened today's session with a carefully worded statement about the case. He expressed deep disappointment with the outcome while attempting to shift responsibility to the previous Conservative government, arguing that the relevant offenses took place under their watch and that their policy documents carefully avoided describing China as an enemy. But here's where this story takes a dramatic turn. The Crown Prosecution Service dropped all charges against both men just weeks before their trial was due to begin. The reason? The government's own evidence didn't prove that China represented a threat to national security at the time of the alleged offenses. This is absolutely staggering when you consider that we're talking about potential espionage activities targeting the heart of British democracy. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Parkinson, made the extraordinary revelation that no one from the government was willing to testify that China represented a threat to national security during the period in question. Under the Official Secrets Act, prosecutors needed to prove the defendants were acting for an enemy, but the government's own stance on China made this impossible to establish in court. This creates a mind-boggling situation where the UK government essentially undermined its own national security prosecution by refusing to officially designate China as a threat. Think about the implications here. We have parliamentary researchers potentially passing sensitive information to Chinese intelligence services, but the case falls apart because the government won't call a spade when it comes to Beijing's activities. The Conservative leader came out swinging with her response.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for marking 4 years since the terrible murder of Sir David Amess. I know that the whole House will want to join me in remembering our former colleague. He is very much still in our hearts and minds. The way he died reminds us that the security of members and this Parliament is paramount. So it concerns us all that the case against two people spying on members of this House has collapsed. It is simply unbelievable. Exactly as I expected, the Prime Minister had to be dragged out at the top of PMQs to give a statement that answers no questions. I don't know what they're laughing at. We are talking about the security of this Parliament. He had to be dragged out to repeat only more obfuscation. It is simply unbelievable. It is simply unbelievable that he is trying to say the last government did not classify China as a threat. So I will refresh his memory. In 2021, the previous government's integrated review described China as the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. In 2024, the Minister for Security said from that dispatch box that China poses a threat. But let's leave aside the government. In 2022, the Director General of MI5 in November classified China as a threat in his remarks. How is it possible that the government failed to provide the evidence that the CPS needed to prosecute?
She described the trial collapse as simply unbelievable and demanded to know why the government allowed this CA to fall apart. She pointed out that these individuals were charged under a Conservative government but let off under Labour, creating a narrative that Starmer's administration has been soft on Chinese espionage. The heated exchange revealed the depth of political division over this national security failure. The opposition's frustration boiled over as they pressed their attack.
Even Even the former Cabinet Secretary, Lord Butler, has accused the government of being economical with the truth on this issue. The Prime Minister can't tell us why Jonathan Powell had a secret meeting which the Security Minister said he had no involvement in the case. He can't tell us why his government did not provide evidence that China was a threat. I suspect those statements won't prove it either. He's blaming his civil servants. He's blaming the media. He's blaming the last government. He cannot explain why he could not see this case through. He should have seen this case through. And let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, about what has happened. A serious case involving national security has collapsed because this government is too weak to stand up to China. And if the Prime Minister cannot protect the members of this House, what does that say about his ability to protect this country?
The case did not proceed because the policy of the past government did not meet the test that was necessary. That is the long and the short of it. Far from evading, I have said I will disclose the full witness statements that set out exactly what was in the witness statements, exactly what the subsequent statement says, and the allegation that somehow they were changed, that the first statement and the second statements are different, is completely and utterly unfounded. Mr. Speaker, it's a pathetic spectacle. Instead of taking responsibility for the fact they failed to update the law,
they accused the government of being too weak to stand up to China and failing to protect parliament members from espionage. The Conservative leader's scathing attack called Starmer's answers evasive and suggested that a serious national security case had collapsed under Labour's watch. The government's own contradictory statements on China were laid bare in Parliament.
Let me be clear. The then Foreign Secretary, sitting I think over here, the Honourable Member for Braintree, 1 month after the arrest, so absolutely the relevant time, gave a speech at Mansion House. It was called Our Position on China, setting out the government's policy. He said in that speech, summing up China as a threat in one word would be, his words, impossible, impractical, and most importantly, unwise. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just him. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition was Business Secretary at the time. In September 23, the Leader of the Opposition said, her words, September 23, the relevant year, her words, we should certainly not be describing China as a foe.
The former Foreign Secretary had given a speech at Mansion House stating it would be impossible, impractical, and most importantly unwise to label China as a threat in one word. Meanwhile, the current leader of the opposition, who was Business Secretary at the time, said in September 2023 that we should certainly not be describing China as a foe. But the real bombshell came when attention turned to National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell. Reports emerged suggesting that Powell may have pushed for the spying case to be withdrawn over fears it could prompt China to pull investment from the UK. This allegation strikes at the heart of concerns that economic considerations are trumping national security imperatives in the government's China policy. The Sunday Times reported that Powell was concerned about the potential impact on Chinese investment, which the Starmer government desperately needs to boost the struggling UK economy. The government is also considering a controversial request from Beijing to build a new embassy building in London, adding another layer to the complex relationship dynamics at play. Conservative MPs didn't hold back in their accusations.
He should have seen this case through. And let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, about what has happened. A serious case involving national security has collapsed because this government is too weak to stand up to China. And if the Prime Minister cannot protect the members of this House, what does that say about his ability to protect this country?
They directly challenged the government's handling of the case, suggesting a cover-up and questioning why evidence wasn't provided to secure prosecutions. Starmer's response attempted to deflect blame back to the previous administration.
The case did not proceed because the policy of the past government did not meet the test that was necessary. That is the long and the short of it. Far from evading, I have said I will disclose the full witness statements that set out exactly what was in the witness statements, exactly what the subsequent statement says, and the allegation that somehow they were changed, that the first statement and the second statements are different, is completely and utterly unfounded.
He argued that the prosecution test couldn't be met because the previous conservative government's policy did not describe China as an enemy, and maintained that no current government minister or advisor played any role in the evidence provision. The security implications of this case are absolutely massive. Christopher Cash wasn't just any researcher, he was a parliamentary researcher with reported close ties to senior conservative lawmakers. The idea that someone in this position could potentially have been passing sensitive information to Chinese intelligence services represents a fundamental breach of parliamentary security. House of Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle expressed his fury about the situation, saying he was very angry and disappointed about the collapsed case. He's even considering bringing a private prosecution against the two men, highlighting just how seriously Parliament views this security breach. Hoyle made it clear that Parliament itself has been the target. It is this Parliament that has been spied on. It is MPS offices that have been infiltrated. The witness statements that Starmer announced would be published reveal the extent of Chinese intelligence activities against the UK. Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Collins provided 3 witness statements to prosecutors, describing Chinese intelligence services as highly capable and conducting large-scale espionage operations against the UK. These activities were designed to advance the Chinese state's interest and harm the interests and security of the UK. Yet, despite this clear assessment of Chinese intelligence threats, the government still couldn't provide the legal framework necessary to sustain a prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. This represents a catastrophic failure of the interface between national security policy and criminal law. The political ramifications extend far beyond this individual case. The conservative opposition is using this as evidence that the Labour government is prioritizing economic relationships with China over national security concerns. They're painting a picture of a government that's willing to sacrifice security prosecutions to avoid upsetting Beijing and potentially losing Chinese investment. This narrative is particularly damaging because it plays into broader concerns about the UK's strategic posture toward China. While intelligence authorities have been ratcheting up their warnings about Beijing's covert activities, and Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee labeled Beijing a strategic threat in 2023, the Labour government has preferred to use the softer term strategic challenge. The timing of this controversy couldn't be worse for Starmer's government. They're trying to reset ties with Beijing after years of deteriorating relations, but this case suggests they may be going too far in accommodating Chinese sensitivities. The idea that national security prosecutions could be influenced by economic considerations sends a dangerous message about the government's priorities. What makes this even more explosive is the precedent it sets. If the government's stance on China can undermine espionage prosecutions, what does this mean for future cases? Are we creating a situation where potential spies can escape prosecution simply because the government won't officially designate their handlers as enemies? The broader security community is watching this case closely because it reveals fundamental weaknesses in how the UK handles espionage cases involving major powers like China. The Official Secrets Act requires prosecutors to prove defendants were acting for an enemy, but in an era of strategic competition rather than open conflict, governments are reluctant to use such stark language. This creates a legal gray area that sophisticated intelligence services can exploit. China operates in this ambiguous space, conducting activities that are clearly hostile to UK interests, while maintaining the fiction of normal diplomatic relations. The government's unwillingness to call out this behavior directly has now undermined a major security prosecution. The international implications are also significant. Other allies are watching how the UK handles Chinese espionage cases, and this collapse sends a worrying signal about British resolve. If the UK won't even sustain prosecutions against alleged Chinese spies, what does this say about the broader Western response to Beijing's intelligence activities? The case also highlights the vulnerability of parliamentary systems to foreign intelligence penetration. Cash's position as a parliamentary researcher gave him potential access to sensitive political intelligence that could be invaluable to foreign services. The fact that this breach may go unpunished because of legal technicalities is deeply concerning for democratic security. Moving forward, this controversy is likely to have lasting political consequences. The opposition will use it to attack the government's China policy and broader national security credentials. Questions about Jonathan Powell's role and the government's priorities will continue to dog Starmer's administration. The government now faces pressure to reform the legal framework for espionage prosecutions to prevent similar failures in the future. The Official Secrets Act may need updating to reflect the realities of modern strategic competition, where traditional concepts of enemies don't capture the full range of threats facing democratic states. This case represents more than just a failed prosecution. It's a symbol of the broader challenges facing Western democracies in countering authoritarian influence operations. The intersection of economic interests, diplomatic sensitivities, and national security imperatives creates complex dilemmas that governments are struggling to navigate effectively. The publication of the witness statements, while providing some transparency, also reveals the extent of the intelligence community's concerns about Chinese activities. The gap between these professional assessments and the government's public stance on China is now glaringly obvious, creating credibility problems that will be difficult to resolve. Ultimately, this controversy exposes fundamental questions about the UK's strategic approach to China and whether economic considerations are being allowed to override security imperatives. The collapse spy case may be over, but the political fallout is just beginning. Starmer's government will need to provide much clearer answers about its China policy and national security priorities if it wants to restore confidence in its handling of these critical issues. The stakes couldn't be higher for British democracy and security.